actually plan to be very tame this afternoon. I think the message, the Rizwan 1983 message of the House of Justice has really created and generated a great deal of energy all over the Baha'i world. In that message, they told us that the growing, I'm quoting, the growing maturity of a worldwide religious community is further evidence in the reaching out by a number of national communities to the social and economic life of the country, exemplified by the founding of tutorial schools, the inception of radio stations, the pursuit of rural development programs, and the operation of medical and agricultural schemes. To these early beginnings must be added the undoubted skills acquired as a result of the Iranian crisis in dealing with international organizations, national government, and the mass media, the very elements of society with which it must increasingly collaborate toward the realization of peace on earth. A wider horizon is opening before us, illumined by a growing and universal manifestation of the inherent potentialities of the cause for ordering human affairs. In this light can be discerned not only our immediate tasks, but more dimly new pursuits and undertakings upon which we must shortly become engaged. I think what is happening in the Baha'i world is that at all levels, at local, national, continental levels, a great deal of very imaginative thinking and a great deal of innovative consultation is going on. And we are all looking forward to see the fruits of this process of consultation. We are all very confident that this new wave of imagination and thinking and consultation is going to start to show us new schemes, new methodologies, new conceptions, clarify our concepts about what our role in a long-term process, which finally has to terminate in the establishment of the Kingdom of God on earth, is. Now, I think all of us who have been thinking about this agree that at such times, in times of so much thinking at the grassroots, this is not the time to begin to lock ourselves into rigid conceptions. And definitely is not the time to start producing manuals on how to do things and how not to do things and what the rules and regulations are. So really I would like to use that as an excuse then not to give a very well structured talk and simply present a couple of ideas and then hopefully have enough time to discuss things and see if we can actually go further, a little further than what we did this morning with Dr. Afri. Let me, I guess what I would like to do is to advance a little forward from our discussion this morning and talk about methodology. I don't think this is really an occasion where we will have the chance to get into details, but maybe with a couple of examples I can bring out a few points that I would like to make. Before doing that, let me just make one point and try to situate ourselves in a historic perspective of what it is that we are really trying to do. I think it would be very erroneous for us to think that the message of Rizwan of 1983 somehow implied a change of direction in the Baha'i faith. That before Rizwan of 83, before that message, we were only concerned with the spiritual things, and now we are also going to get involved in charity. It is easy to fall into that kind of thinking, and we should make sure that we avoid that. The involvement in social and economic development can only be understood properly, historically, as a further step in the unfoldment of a single plan, the final goal of which is the establishment of Kingdom of God on earth. If you look back a little bit towards the 1950s, the leaders of thought were basically defining development in terms of economic growth at any cost. And they had a very simple formula: capital investment plus transfer of know-how, and that was going to get us everywhere. All right? Now, during that time, during those very years, during the 10-year crusade, the Baha'is of the world were working all over the world, in the farthest, remotest areas of the world, and they were in a most amazing outburst of energy. They were establishing their faith everywhere on the globe. The primary task of this campaign, of this plan, was of course winning the hearts of people, of individuals, for Baha'u'llah. But parallel to this, what they were doing was that they were organizing themselves in local communities. Now, that excellent job, that unbelievable task, has moved forward. By now, we have, let's situate ourselves as Rizwan of 1983, when the message of the House of Justice was announced. Or now, for example, we have more than 140 national assemblies. We have established thousands of local communities with their organizations. We have worked out the basic functions of both arms of the administrative order, the decision makers, and the arms more concerned, the councillors, the auxiliary board members, more concerned with counseling, with the releasing the energies of the individuals, with bringing knowledge to bear on our actions. And so, when at Rizwan of 1983 the message was received, it was clear to everyone that the Baha'i world had really turned the corner, and that although there were many challenges ahead, we are far from having built the kingdom of God on earth, but that something very important and very essential had already been done. And we were looking at the House of Justice established in its own seat, fulfilling the prophecies of Baha'u'llah himself, the famous sentence that ere long will God sail his ark upon thee to Mount Carmel, and will manifest the people of Baha who have been mentioned in the Book of Names. And so that is how we were entering the understanding of this momentous message of the House of Justice. At the same time, the world, the outside world, had been led from failure to failure. The economic growth, we had economic growth. Many countries had grown at 5%, 6%, whatever good growth rates are for years. Nothing had happened. Well, many things had happened. The rich had got richer and the poor had got poorer. The subsequent plans of the World Bank and so on, that we were going to get to the 40% poorer people, basically failed. So all this talk outside the faith of what development was, what capital investment, the transfer of know-how, had really reached the point where nobody could exactly believe it. Now, in the 1950s, they used to ask us, all right, or in the 60s, what do you do for the poor? And the poor Baha'is very sheepishly would say, we are organizing them. Yeah. And they would say, no, but that is not. What's that for? What are you doing for the poor? Which meant, how much money are you transferring to them? What kind of big, what are you building for them? Are you building roads? Are you building hospitals and so on? And we kept saying, we are organizing them. Now, in 1983, in the field of development, nobody would have had doubts, including all the thinkers of the field of development, would not have any doubts to say that local organization is one of the basic elements of any development plan. and that without it, really, development plans are doomed to fail. So the world had also come our way. And so it is really at such a historic moment that the message of the House of Justice came to us. And as we all together saw this morning, a little bit, the Baha'i world entered this new endeavor, the continuation of what it had done. It added to it this new endeavor and entered it from a position of extreme strength. And I think that point is very important, and we should always remind ourselves of that, or whatever discussions we are going to have about development. Now, with that historic perspective, let me go and try to present to you a couple of ideas about methodology. Let us look at the phrase in the October message of the House of Justice that they say that that basically the progress in the development field, in our endeavors, will depend, and I'm quoting, on natural stirrings at the grassroots, and it should receive its driving force from those sources rather than from an imposition of plans and programs from the top. Now, during the past years, again, in the field of development, many workers in the field have become quite aware that plans designed by experts, carried out from a central place, sort of given out to the people out in the villages or the poorer neighborhoods of the city and so on, do not work. So it is not unusual to hear everybody say that top-down development is no good, and that development should be somehow bottom-up. That is the phrase that one usually hears. Translated into this language, the message of the House of Justice is certainly warning us that top-down development will not be the kind of development that the Baha'is are most probably going to get involved in, that there are dangers in that. But what I would like to present to you is that we shouldn't be too hasty to say that therefore Baha'i development is going to be bottom-up the way it is, that phrase is being used outside the faith among developers. Especially because the phrase is being used in so many ways that I don't think anybody really knows what they're talking about, and it is totally confusing. And somehow we have to go back to the statement of the House of Justice about the fact that our development efforts will get their driving force from the stirrings of the grassroots, and try to translate that into concrete things, concrete methods, concrete techniques, and in a much bigger sense, concrete methodologies, which would include conceptions, ideas, as well as techniques, methods, and finally means and products and technologies and everything else. Again, there are so many different approaches and methodologies that people are using for development projects that we could not very easily go into a deep analysis of them. But let us just look very briefly at a couple of ideas. At the simplest level, or even at the most simplistic level, this not top-down development has meant to many people being sensitive to the needs of the beneficiaries or the target population, which is the words they use. Now, many techniques have been developed around this basic idea of need in order to assess and determine the needs of families, villages, or entire regions. The simplest one would just go out, have a questionnaire, and ask people what you want. And then they would get more and more sophisticated and get to a point of or participatory observation, where somebody would live with the people and participate in all their activities, and then somehow through that participation and going through all sorts of techniques and so on, would come out finally and say these are the real needs of this village or this population that I'm working with. There are a lot of techniques and a lot of methods. There is no doubt for any of us that in the final analysis, Baha'i projects are also going to have to be responsive to the real needs of the people. That is a valid concept. And probably we are going to have to learn at some point and slowly incorporate into our methodology certain techniques of diagnosis. Obviously not the questionnaire one. I mean, everybody knows that is absurd. I mean, they will tell you, usually you get things that have been fed into them by the propaganda, by radio and so on, and they'll give you a list of things they want, which is really has nothing to do with the reality of their lives. But there are techniques, interesting methods, that actually could allow us to determine real needs, what people call real needs. But what we have to do way before that, deciding whether we use a specific instrument or not, is to really try to look critically at the whole question of needs and analyze it in a much more at a wider level, in a social context. For example, we would have to ask ourselves questions such as what is really the nature and the philosophy behind this kind of a diagnose first, give solutions afterwards approach to development, which is a medical analogy, isn't it? I mean, somebody is sick, you diagnose his sickness and you give him the medicine. Now, all these wonderful techniques and methodologies somehow are borrowing that idea into them, and that's what comes across. Now, is that concept valid? I mean, is that something that we as Baha'is want to work with? That doesn't mean necessarily we're going to throw away the methods and the techniques, but we are going to have to understand in terms of methodologies of work, what are really the concepts behind these things? Who is diagnosing whose condition? Who gave any one person the right to go to somebody's village and diagnose their condition and finally come up with a list of needs that they weren't even aware of, and say this is their real need because somehow I did all these things? Is development really such a simple thing that you just diagnose the certain conditions, you give the technologies that solve it, and there you are, and everything will just fall into place? Who has the solutions? Does the developing world have actually solutions for the problems of the developing world? So what is this business of diagnosing and giving solutions if we don't even have the knowledge in the developed world about how to go about bringing about change in the rest of the world or in our own societies here? So what I'm really trying to suggest is that as we enter the field of development, we are going to have to look at things that sound very good at the first instance, and then try to analyze them from social point of view, from point of view of the faith, from a spiritual point of view, and try to understand what their implications are, and this way begin to come up with our own methodology, which will have to come from our own activities and our own programs. Now, to just go a little further, what the kind of critical analysis that I'm suggesting has nothing to do with whether the solutions are good or bad. It really is a question of what are the processes of reaching a conception of what solutions are. Who participates in them? Who decides? It is that process is probably as important as the final product and as the final solution that we can come up with. I know that most of you are familiar with the concepts of, say, appropriate technology. Again, I think we should all be warned that a good number of people who have followed the concepts of appropriate technology have not gotten very farther away from this conception of diagnosis first, solution second, simplistic kind of view of what development is. What they have done, they have changed the solutions from, say, capital intensive to labor intensive, from modern to traditional. But appropriate technology, discussions of appropriate technology and the methodologies to use only become interesting when they are posed in terms of the participation of the people in the decision-making process, the participation of the people in the generation of knowledge, in the application of knowledge, in the knowledge systems involved, whose knowledge. And these are the questions that really make a discussion of appropriate technology interesting, not just definitions of the products and the instruments and the gadgets again, or whether they're sophisticated or they're simple, they're labor intensive or they're capital intensive. Now, I think the question of technology may be one of the questions that during the weekend we may want to talk about more, but let me try to stick to the question of methodology and see how far we can advance. The whole question then of participation and the role of the people in the decision-making process about their own development is at the heart of the debate of the concepts and the methodologies of development. And it has obviously led, as I mentioned before, to many, many different techniques and different methodologies. And some very sophisticated. So you would find methodologies that are based on looking at participation from a point of view of power. Others which would look at it from the point of view of political structures. Others that would look at it from the point of view of economic structures, like markets, and so on. Even those who would look at it from the point of view of logical structure that shape the thinking of a given people. So, for example, a methodology, perspective, that is looking from a political structure point of view would basically define bottom-up development in terms of the participation of a people, villagers and so on, in a political structure. And then by definition, if the political structure is a true democratic structure in which the power is with the people, then whatever the people say is the appropriate thing, and that defines the direction of development. People who would look at it from the point of view of knowledge systems and of logical structures, for example, some people who are working in the Andean region, may come and tell you that it is not that. What really what real development means is that kind of development that has to do with the logical structure of the Andean people, which is a different logical structure than the Western logical structure because of their very specific ecological setting. They have developed their own way of thinking about life and production and agriculture and everything else. And that real development is freeing them from the imposed Western view, allow them to develop and follow their own path of development according to their own logic. Right? So that's how they would define a whole methodology of development, which would be basically a methodology of liberating, say, the Andean people from Western structures and somehow get them back to where they were before the European invasion. So all of these points of view, all of these conceptions will give rise to different definitions of what not top-down development is. And certainly these are very sophisticated concepts and definitions. They're not simple things, just like, what's your problem? Here is your solution. Let me just move on and describe one of these methodological perspectives, which in Latin America is known as educación popular, popular education. Right? I will sort of read a little bit from some of their own writings, but I'm paraphrasing. I'm not quoting them exactly. The exponents of the followers of this methodology of educación popular would begin their analysis, especially with the training component of all development programs, of most development programs, and would say that these training approaches are basically technocratic in nature, and all these programs are technocratic in nature. They would say that these training programs that are taken by all these programs from the top everywhere to the villages and to the poor neighborhoods of the country are means of vertical and authoritarian manipulation of the people at the grassroots, and their purpose is to invade their culture. The technocratic view, this is not my view, I'm giving you somebody else's view to then afterwards look at and critically analyze. The technocratic view assigns to training and education the role of transferring technology, knowledge and capabilities and technical assistance from a central structure to the people themselves. In rural areas, it also makes credit available in order to trap the peasants for a market that offers them manufactured products for cheap labor and cheap food produced by them, which will finally maintain society. When technocratic programs become involved in community development, these people would say, they basically try to mobilize the resources of the community and direct them to become integrated into a social structure that brings them nothing but misery. These community development programs use sophisticated social and psychological methods to change the norms and values of traditional populations, and the corresponding training programs use the manuals of how to do in order to develop skills in the individuals to function under the situation of cultural and political dominance. They go on, and I think it is worthwhile following the argument to the end. Educación popular, they say, on the other hand, is an alternative education which is the people's own process of education. And think of these in terms of a methodology of work, and I'm presenting it in that light. It is destined to overcome the causes of oppression and not reinforce them as technocratic training and education does. Educación popular is part of a more ample process of social transformation and is carried out within the very set of complex activities that people at grassroots carry out in order to live and to survive. So it basically concerns itself not with training programs from outside, but looks at what people do and tries to reinforce whatever they're doing. That is part of the essential aspect of that methodology. Educación Popular proposes to contribute to the understanding of the causes to the real problems that people confront, and it does so by supporting local participation and local organization. They would support any local organization within the population that is trying to do something. Popular education programs are not carried out in vacuum. They always accompany actions in such areas as technology, health, or adult education. The educational activities are not academic, but are always concrete, assuming that the process of acquiring knowledge about reality should begin from everyday events and slowly become formalized and abstract, later to be validated in action again. You begin with actions of the community, you organize them, you reflect on them, you validate them again in another set of actions that you set in motion. That is the basic methodology. In short, popular education assumes that there should be a close connection between action, the processes of generation, and the processes of generation and learning of knowledge. These aspects should be integrated in a permanent collective reflection that should lead to social change and transformation. Then the proponents of this methodological approach would basically put their challenges as 4 or 5 things. They would say they want to discover, recognize, and validate the logical structure in the thinking of the community, as well as the causal relationships among the different phenomena in the community and the corresponding forces of oppression. That's one thing they want to do. They want to reinforce the daily activities of the community and develop them further through constant critical questioning of what happens from day to day. They want to promote the participation of the community members in both action and reflection, so that they would gradually take charge of their own lives collectively through organization. This includes the transfer of the control of development projects to themselves, to the community itself. And then they want to ascertain that all these activities have a permanent character and are not confined to single projects. Now, here is a methodological approach. Probably we would disagree with many of its assumptions, but look at it, at its sophistication, at its political sophistication, compared to a simple process of technological transfer. So, as we look at these different methodologies, and really my suggestion is that one of the activities of Baha'i scholars and people who are going to think about development is to start to look and analyze the methodologies that are out there, to begin to get a vision of what our own methodologies are. We would, for example, look at something like that, and we would probably be impressed, actually, by some of the things that they're saying. They're certainly process-minded, and that is quite an advance from a mind that only thinks of simple solutions and simple packages of things to be handed out to people. But as one begins to look at these programs actually and work with them and analyze them, then one begins to have a great number of questions. For example, they tend to put too much emphasis on processes, and it seems, especially political processes, and it seems that they consider these processes, political activity, as an end in itself. One can begin to ask them, well, what is the direction of these processes? Where do you want these things to go? And unlike, for example, structured Marxists, these people will not tell you, because everything is supposed to come out of popular education itself. It is the whole thing. So the process itself of going through this is it. So one really begins to get a feeling of a little bit of anarchy as one talks to them, of where do you really want these processes to go? What is your goal? What kind of a vision do you have of a world that we want to build? And that does not come through at all. One can ask them, is everything that the poor do all right? Should we reinforce everything they do? Is somehow political manipulation an ugly thing when it is done by the oppressors, but is beautiful when it's done by the oppressed? Is that somehow we're supposed to believe that and reinforce the same kind of ugliness because it is done by the poor and because they're oppressed? We can ask them, for example, is it reasonable to think that the knowledge that is necessary to bring such a great change into the world already exists among the masses of people, and all we need are these educator facilitators who are going to go among these people and somehow help this knowledge to surface, and that we will know exactly what to do, and the processes will take us into a different world, whatever that different world is. We could ask themselves, are these educator facilitators really so disciplined that they do not, since they are not usually from the popular, from the poor themselves, are they so disciplined that their own ideologies don't enter into this debate and this wonderful process of reflection that they are setting in motion? Are they that disciplined? Now the fact is that when one looks at these projects, many of them are basically arenas for political indoctrination. And that is really what is coming through. So again, I want to emphasize, my purpose is not to give a discussion of all the methodologies of development, but I think these two examples, one from one kind of mentality, one from a totally different mentality, should help us at least to understand what we mean when we are saying that we as Baha'is are going to have to come up with rather sophisticated methodologies. They don't need to be complicated, but we definitely have to go and think through them. Now, we can ask ourselves, do we have them already? I think the answer, I would like to suggest to you that the answer has two sides to it. One is that it is our job to find these methodologies and the techniques and the conceptions and the approaches. And we can be, as we were looking this morning at our strengths, we can be very sure that we will. Because here is a world community totally connected, communicated, with the most amazing network all over the world, setting out programs. They each can be very small, but some of them certainly will not be small, in all sorts of places, ecological settings, cultural settings. And as the learning goes on, as we move forward in this process, certainly our capacity to produce knowledge and to learn and to come up with effective methodologies of work is great. It's something that I don't think any of us really see clearly. It is far beyond our imagination, the setup that we have in the world and the kind of capacity it gives us to come up with answers and to learn. But then on the other hand, the other side of this question I would like to suggest is that the basic principles of our approaches and our methodologies are already in our writings. But then we are going to have to do something, and we are going to have to go back to our writings and read them all again and try to understand them in a far greater context than our usual tendency to simplify everything, reduce everything into a couple of formulas. Consultation is kata, teaching is this, mass teaching is this, consolidation is this kind of thing. little formulas that we tend to bring up. We are really going to have to go and look at our writings and try to analyze them in sophisticated, in very broad social terms. This morning, we started that a little bit, and it was very interesting that the examples that most people talked about were consultation, and certainly it is a reasonable statement and true to consider and look at consultation and ask ourselves, isn't really consultation a most marvelous methodology of community action? Now, but looked at again, we would have to write books about it if we are going to understand it in those terms. You mentioned a few ideas this morning. Let me just suggest a couple of other ones. One of the most amazing things about Baha'i consultation is that it is carried out by definition. It is carried out in conditions of equality. This means, for example, that even in a case where in a remote village there is a pioneer who has gone there, and presumably this pioneering has some expertise and has far more experience than the villagers who may be just Baha'is for last 2 weeks or whatever, he or she has to enter into the Baha'i consultation from conditions of absolute equality. And that is not just a statement. By definition, he is a member of that community and not a member of the community from which he came from. I mean, even to that detail, we have got it straight. The Baha'i writings have arranged it even to that detail. He's a member of that community. He has nothing to do anymore with he loves his old friends in the old community, but he's not a member of the old community anymore. An American believer who goes pioneering is not an American Baha'i anymore. He's a Baha'i of wherever he is living. Therefore enters into consultation from a condition of equality. Now compare that with the conception of experts, outside experts, who go to any Baha'i project. And just think of that as we will be able to send all over the world greater and greater numbers of Baha'is from different parts who have certain expertise to participate in local Baha'i development projects. And how we will avoid, by definition, again, the whole question of outsider-insider, which is one of the basic issues of methodological debate and the different views that exist over it. And it's one of those things that none of these programs, including the one I read, the Educación Popular, who would very much like to pretend that they have solved it, they really have not. Because this educator-facilitator is an outsider, and in the final analysis, he will tell you that he is. What he has done is that he now tries not to impose his views. He does it under the table. But he also has this patronizing view of the community, because in a certain sense he is trying to shield it from the outside world. He's that guy who won't let bad knowledge and everything come in. He will talk to them about their own knowledge and the creation of their own knowledge. So you see how a simple statement in our writing about the process of consultation and the way we arrange our administration takes care of a whole big issue of methodological debate in the world. Now take that as an example, and I'm sure there are hundreds of others. We'll really be talking about Baha'i methodology. Another example would be the fact that the principles of Baha'i consultation define very clearly our attitudes and our views of knowledge systems. Just by the fact that everyone's view, including the least educated, is to be taken equal to everybody else's, means that we automatically, when a group of people in a village get together to talk about their development project, including villagers, old ones with a lot of traditional views, the young ones who have gone to the next village school, and the pioneers come from somewhere else with a total different culture, we automatically are able to tap into different knowledge systems and treat them in a spiritual atmosphere of harmony and try to get out of those knowledge systems the most we can. Again, that simple fact compared to the hundreds of papers that these days are being written on the whole question of the tension of the knowledge systems, different knowledge systems in development. The traditional versus the modern, the intuitive, the quantifiable, the exact, etc., etc. Okay? But we have the structure to actually tap into all these different knowledge systems, and we have the extra benefit of the fact that our consultation should be always accompanied by consulting the holy text. That contains balance and really brings in illumination, because all these other knowledge systems are, after all, knowledge systems of mankind, of humankind, and they are very fragile, constantly changing anyway. I would like to now just give you an example to get this to a more practical level. I probably tired you with all these things. But let me just give you an example of something I participated in. As an example of the search that Baha'is are going through, as to how they're supposed to do these things and what kind of methods and techniques and methodologies they should use. I had the privilege of accompanying a group of people, an auxiliary board member, one or two members of the proper regional committees, to a village, a Baha'i community, a few months ago in Colombia, in which they were basically going to that community to begin a process of consultation about the message, about the October 20th message of the House of Justice. Now, I have participated in other programs. I have studied programs when, again, workers, Educación Popular, or the diagnosers, or whoever go to a village and try to start under very uncomfortable circumstances, try to begin to move things to get a conversation going. But there we were. We were not outsiders. Not because we lived there, but because we were there presenting the institutions of the Baha'i faith, which, after all, those villagers who were Baha'is, it was their faith. Right? Some of them were the members of the local assembly of this administrative structure. Someone was a member of a committee at a regional level. Actually, one of them was, and somebody was coming from outside. Right? Someone was an auxiliary board member. So we were clearly beginning a consultation from inside. There was no question of anybody from outside coming and doing anything for anybody. Here we were, Baha'is, members of a Baha'i world community, respecting our different roles of our structure, of a world structure, and saying, all right, here we are. Here is a message from the Universal House of Justice, our supreme body. And they have told us to begin to think about the material well-being of our communities as well as the spiritual well-being. And now here you are, we have come to consult and see what do we do? And what are the things we would do in this village? Now, again, that's wonderful, but one needs more concrete things to do. And so, a couple of us had seen other methods and techniques, and we were trying to see what you can do with these techniques in that setting. I'm not trying to, I don't think those techniques are necessarily good or bad, but just I want to use them as to give you an example of the kind of things that people can do. So, the consultation then was not just a consultation in which one would say, all right, give your opinion. There was structure to the consultation. We had thought about a series of steps that we would go through to consult about this very important theme of defining for that village, for that Baha'i community, a path of their own development. So we sat around and we said, all right, why don't we first, each one of us, tell what are the activities, daily activities that go on in our community. Then everybody started talking. We cook. We bring water from 2 kilometers away. We gather wood for fire. We have 19-day feast. We have a small fund. We sleep. We have children. We die. We marry. We have a cornfield. We have a long list of things that we do. All right. Then we said, all right, can we, from all these things that we do, can we together, by consulting, decide which ones need a lot of improvement and which ones need little improvement? And we decided that we would give to these things numbers, 0 to 10. This is crude methodology, but this was a beginning to see what we could do with things. And so we talked, and somebody said, all right, water, bringing water, 10. They're all sick and tired of going and bringing water from so far away. Gathering wood, 10, because there was no wood anymore. All the trees had finished and had been cut down. Preparing food. The older ladies in the group said 0. And personally, I thought they were right. I said, great. I'm sure you cook very well, and this is fine. This is good. Then one of the young girls said, but shouldn't we think a little bit about the nutritional content of what we eat? And they all talked. 5. Good 5. The 19-day feast. Actually, this community has a great 19-day feast because they really have a feast and they play and they have but they don't have an administrative part. Again, they wanted 0. This was great. And then one of them, who is the member of the committee and has more administrative capacity, says, but shouldn't we add better administrative part to our 19-day feast? Again, 19-day feast got 5. So we went through this activity, and everything got some number as to whether it is to be improved or not. And we really didn't have to go through these sophisticated ways of weighing things. I mean, it was just a consultation. It was a process of doing something. Then we said, now let us do something more. Let us take these things and separate them into 3 categories. Those that we can improve with no help from outside. Those that we need some help from outside. And those that we would have to do almost entirely with resources from outside. But again, we were insiders doing this. And so we began. The water system, it was 100% from outside. In that setting, they needed 3 million pesos to build the aqueduct, and they just didn't have it. And it was clear that the Baha'i faith didn't have it. So this was going to be something that we were going to go for some other time from outside. I'm starting with the ones that had 10. The one that had to do with gathering wood, which also had the 10, fell in the second category. They first thought they didn't need any help from outside. It would be all themselves. Then actually one of us suggested, but wouldn't it be nice to know, to bring somebody from outside who knows from forestry and so on, to just give them a few ideas, basic ideas, how you plant trees and how you can do a simple reforestation program. They looked at it and said, all right, let's put it in the second one because we can do it, but it is nice to have some input from outside. They had put the contribution to the fund actually also at 10, which is strange because they have a little school and they contribute to it. Baha'i school, but they felt that it was really urgent, so 10. And they said, all right, that one is in the first category, we do it ourselves. Right? So they went through, and they put different things, the 9s and the 8s and so on, in these 3 different categories. Now, the other friends have gone back to this community, and they are in a process, the committee, again, within the administrative order of the faith, not as development workers, but as part of the programs of the National Assembly. This auxiliary board member and the committee members, I think, have gone to that community, all right? And they're in the process of using this thing and to find out how they can define a path for development. I haven't been back there. I don't know exactly the results. But what it was obvious in that time, that projects were just going to come out by themselves. It was obvious that they could do a reforestation, simple reforestation project from themselves. Okay? Maybe this is a very simple example of the kind of things we can do to get the stirring from the grassroots. I'm sure we can do 100 times better. I think we can do many better things. We can come up with marvelous methods of doing it. But for that, we really have to begin to get involved in the writing, begin to analyze our writings at a much deeper level, try to understand them in terms of social processes, but social processes of the world, not just the North American social processes. There is a world out there which is very different from North America, and which, if I understand it right, the path of development that it is going to have to take, according to the Baha'i sense, is not to come towards North America, but to go further and further away from it. And it is North America that is going to go somewhere else before we get to the kingdom of God on earth. Therefore, trying to understand the writings and the implications of everything within the North American culture somehow isn't going to be the way to arrive at these very deep understandings of what our faith is about. But that doesn't mean that the North American culture also obviously has its contribution to make. But somehow we have to bring that up to a condition of equality. We have to learn to consult at the world level in conditions of equality, cultural equality. We have to understand these other cultures and begin to accept that they have many, many valid points, analyze and understand their social processes, and understand our writings and our teaching as they apply to these social processes equally within the North America and in other parts of the world. And then we have to do many, many projects. For these many, many projects, we need human resources. The human resources for these projects are sitting, most of them right now, in North America and Europe. We need to sacrifice. We need to rise. And we're going to have to do at least what these popular educators do, which really do leave their own cultures and their own settings and go and live with those people for different reasons. And they don't talk so much about sacrifice as we do. The word doesn't even enter into their methodology as I read it to you. They don't talk about themselves as being sacrificed for that process. But Baha'is do. Each time we do the slightest thing for the faith, it is a great sacrifice. And if we get up and leave all these beautiful things in our homes and go somewhere else to pioneer, go to a village to live in a year, it is the greatest sacrifice. And imagine now, within what we have been saying, within this context, what kind of a relationship we would be having with a community who we are going to live with and be a member of, but who deep down in our heart, we feel that the fact that we are there is a sacrifice. Right? This is the other side of the coin. I had to, he said that I said something, so I had to end talk with some of these concepts. Right? So we really have to go a long way along our own path of a spiritual development, if we are going to do all the things that we are saying we are going to do, because we have all the strength that we have said we do have. And just to finish, let me read them something from the October message of the House of Justice on that exact point. They say the steps to be taken must necessarily begin in the Baha'i community itself, with the friends endeavoring through the application of a spiritual principle, the rectitude of conduct, and the practice of the art of consultation, to uplift themselves and thus become self-sufficient and self-reliant. Moreover, these exertions will conduce to the preservation of human honor, so desired by Baha'u'llah. In the process and as a consequence, the friends will undoubtedly extend the benefits of their efforts to society as a whole, until all mankind achieves the progress intended by the Lord of Age. Ultimately, the call to action is addressed to the individual friends, whether they be adult or youth, veteran or newly enrolled. Let them step forth to take their places in the arena of service, where their talents and skills, their specialized training, their material resources, their efforts of time and energy, and above all, their dedication to Baha'u'llah's Baha'i principles can be put to work in improving the lot of man. I think we should